Only now did the She-Queen realize that when she was seeing the blur, the arrow that had created the blur had already struck her. Dismay, shock, panic, countless emotions flitted through the She-Queen's eyes. Bang! A moment later, a terrifying energy erupted from the arrow in her chest. Aya! The She-Queen screamed out as she trembled, and she was carried away more than 200 feet by the power of the arrow and slammed into the ground. Bastard! The She-Queen bounced off the ground and got to her knees. Her black hair was in disarray as she raised her head and glared at the fortress. The lunge the She-Queen had instinctively made out of fear had saved her life. The arrow that should have shot through her heart had missed by several inches and failed to take her life. Now that she had survived, her savage she-nature erupted. Since you dare to treat me this way, don't blame me. There was a fierce gleam in the She-Queen's eyes. A moment later, she pressed her arms against the ground and grabbed. Caklack! A wave of cold energy seemed to be drawn out of the earth, and as soldiers from both her side and the enemy side watched in shock, the She-Queen began to exert an enormous pull, drawing in all the snow and cold air around the area of the Alliance army and coalescing it into crystalline ice drills that shot out of the ground. These ice drills rapidly expanded to lengths of 300 to 400 feet. As these ice drills crazily grew, they began to coil around each other as if they were alive. In short order, they had combined into a magnificent and broad ice bridge that seemed straight out of a dream. Everyone was struck dumb by this ice element ability. I did not expect the She-Queen to have such frightening ice element cultivation. Beneath the 6 banners, and Lushan's eyes flew open in surprise, his lips trembling. When it came to cultivating the 5 elements, they were easy to start but difficult to master. The ability the She-Queen had displayed marked her as not merely an ice element cultivator, but one who had reached the very apex and could be considered one of the strongest such experts in the world. This was a surprising harvest for Lushan. He had never envisioned this when first recruiting the She-Queen. Even the Chitin King was flabbergasted. He had known the She-Queen for a long time, but he had never seen her use her full abilities or unleash such frightening strength. The arrow that Wang Chong had ordered to be loosed against her had apparently completely provoked her ire. The sight of the crazed She-Queen caused the Chitin King to shiver. Cold air surged as the stellar energy in the She-Queen's body was rapidly consumed. But at this moment she no longer cared. Although the war had yet to reach its most intense moment, she had been thoroughly enraged by Chuluo's arrow. Caklack! The ice bridge extended with astonishing speed, and with a crisp crack, an ice bridge that was around 6 meters wide and 1 meter thick connected to the walls, followed by a second, a third, a fourth. In just a few short moments, a series of large ice bridges leading straight to the walls had appeared. Bastard! I'd like to see how you deal with this. The She-Queen gnashed her teeth in hatred. But despite her words, after creating the ice bridges, the She-Queen immediately began to flee. Her powers had been greatly reduced by this massive consumption of stellar energy, and she no longer had the ability to contend against a great general. Staying any longer meant certain death. What are you looking around for? Go! The She-Queen rebuked as she ran past a group of soldiers. You bastards! Hurry up and receive me! Hearing this, several nearby generals began to ride toward the She-Queen, and even the distant Chitin King yelled and began to ride over. Bang! In a flash of light, another heaven-shaking arrow blasted toward the She-Queen. But this time, with a thunderous crack, someone blocked Chuluo's arrow. It was none other than Great General Taichi Bil-Eli. Taichi Bil-Eli was the Eastern Turkic Khaganate's elite great general, and even Zhang Shogui had had a hard time with him. He was more than capable of blocking this arrow. Bastard! The She-Queen, though she had escaped this calamity, had turned ghastly white from fear, and she continued to flee like a frightened bird. Woman, it seems you're quite nimble. Within the steel fortress, on the roof of a prominent metal building, Chuluo slowly put down the demon god Bao, a sharp light in his eyes. All levels of the Tongluo tribe venerated the idea of the true man and would not strike women. Though the She-Queen was a woman, Chuluo had ultimately been rather hesitant. Otherwise, the She-Queen might not have been able to escape. As for the ice bridges, Chulu wasn't concerned. Anyone who thought that they could break through the steel fortress with just these few ice bridges was just dreaming. The only problem was that the She-Queen had sealed off the kerosene, truly creating a problem. "General, how was it?" A voice interrupted Chulu's thoughts, and as he turned to the speaker, he saw a small and thin figure jumping across the rooftops toward him. It was none other than Wang Chong's close aide, Jean Quebec. "I have disappointed His Highness. If not for a small error, Chulu would have been able to kill the She-Queen." Chulu bowed, a hint of shame in his eyes. Orders were as weighty as mountains, and a subordinate's most important duty was to carry out orders. Wang Chong had given him the demon god Bao, but he had failed to kill the She-Queen. Regardless of whether or not Tai Chi Bil Eli intervened, this was a stone-cold fact. Haha, General does not need to be concerned. His Highness expected this. A single She-Queen cannot influence the overall situation. His Highness has planned everything. General should quickly go back and make your report. Zhang Ke chuckled, seemingly unconcerned. Chulu couldn't help but be taken aback by this reply. But Chulu quickly understood. The king of foreign lands was the war saint, renowned for his foresight and stratagems. There was little doubt that he had already known what would happen when he gave the demon god Bao to Chulu to deal with the She-Queen. Everything was part of his calculations. His first priority was to not affect the king of foreign lands' other plans. "Yes, Chulu will go to report." Chulu quickly jumped down from the building. "Kill!" In the distance, Alliance soldiers cheered at the sight of the wide and resplendent path the She-Queen had created. Compared to ropes and siege ladders, this method was much faster. More importantly, with this broad path, even cavalry could charge up the walls. "Everyone, charge!" An Eastern Turkic general raised his scimitar and led the charge up the ice bridge. He was cautious at first, worried that the ice bridges would be too fragile. But when his horse trod onto the ice, he found it to be incredibly thick and firm, even giving off a faint metallic echo. Wonderful! The general was energized and immediately spurred his horse into a charge, shooting toward the walls like an arrow from a bow. The ice bridges were far sturdier than anticipated, even serving as extra shields that protected the Alliance army as it charged up to the walls. Even the threat of the ballistae were reduced this way. "Brothers, kill!" Tens of thousands of cavalry followed the general in charging up the ice bridges. 7,000 some feet seemed like a vast distance, but for cavalry charging at full speed, it was a matter of only a few seconds. Behind the cavalry, the earth rumbled as the Gogrian, Khitan, Shi, and Yuzhou soldiers bellowed and charged across the ice bridges. Clang! A long and heavy sword flashed as it hacked at the part of the ice bridge connected to the wall. But even when swung with full force, the sword was only able to leave a crack on the ice bridge, and the impact caused the sword to bounce back. The armored Tang soldiers on the walls who had wanted to hack away at the ice bridges instantly paled. The She-Queen's ice bridges were far more frightening than they had anticipated. "Take up formation. Prepare for battle." A thunderous roar resounded through the world. A general on the wall swiftly began to issue orders. Cavalry moved extremely fast, and cutting down the ice bridges took more time and energy than they had. Rumble. A few moments later, the Alliance army arrived, and the two armies began to fiercely battle on the ice bridges. Nay! With resounding neighs, the cavalry charged onto the walls, and several city defense soldiers were caught off guard and were thrown off the walls by the impact. Bang, bang, bang. As the cavalry entered the battle, the walls instantly fell into turmoil. "Take up formation." With a bellowed order, the Tang army began to shift back into their formidable formations. There were 6 men to each unit, and all of their energies were fused together, making them like a steel plate. Bang! Another horseman charged over, but this time he faced 6 sharp and heavy swords. Right after reaching the walls, the horseman was cut into pieces, and his corpse was carried by his inertia over the walls. The city defense division's rigorous training immediately showed its effect, and it took only a few moments until order was restored to the walls. More soldiers charged across the ice bridges, and large numbers of people died on both sides as the armies battled. But Wang Chong had specifically trained his 100,000 soldiers for city defense. So even with the She Queen's ice bridges, it was difficult to break through them. Moreover, bang! With a massive boom, a ballista bolt wrapped in destructive energy shot through an ice bridge, leaving a large hole in that sturdy bridge and sending ice shards flying. All the ballistae had changed targets and begun to fire on the ice bridges. As An Lushan listened to the war cries from the distance, he slightly frowned. It's no good. This isn't enough to break the steel fortress. The She Queen had managed to deal with the kerosene, but it still seemed that breaking through the walls and opening the gate was a distant goal. Wang Chong was far more prepared than he had anticipated. With this defense line, Wang Chong could defend against him until the end of time. Wang Chong could wait, but An Lushan could not. The Alliance army had lost almost 400,000 soldiers, while Wang Chong's losses had been rather limited. If they could not break this stalemate, the Alliance's morale would suffer a heavy blow. An Lushan turned to Gao Shang and said, Gao Shang, it seems that we have to execute the second phase of the plan. Gao Shang nodded. He had also not anticipated that the second phase would have to be used so soon after the battle had begun. But it truly did seem like there was no way of ending this impasse other than activating the second phase. But if we do this, we will be in an extremely passive position. After all, the enemy generals have yet to make their move, Gao Shang worriedly said. According to Gao Shang's plan, the battle needed to reach the stage where the generals on both sides had entered the fray, and only then would they begin seeking out the right time to activate the second phase. But the Great Tang's defenses were simply too strong, and the generals on both sides had yet to take action. There's nothing to be done, and Lushan's eyes flashed with resolve. He turned to the Divine Works Elder and said, Divine Works Elder, I must trouble you for this. Haha, it's fine as long as you've thought it over. Venerable Genesis Supreme has already said that once the battle begins, everyone, including me, will obey your commands. The Divine Works Elder proudly laughed, seemingly unconcerned. But I must tell you that there are only 3 of the item that you want, which represents the entirety of the organization stockpile. If you fail, you will not get a second chance. In addition, firing it requires a long charging period. You will need to wait a while before it actually fires. And Lushan merely grunted and said no more. The Divine Works Elder faintly smiled and quickly departed. At the front, the battle continued and the losses continued to climb. The Alliance army was suffering far more losses than the Great Tang. Kaklak, on the eastern side of the fortress, one of the tough ice bridges that spanned several thousand feet, finally collapsed under the continuous ballista fire, and countless Alliance soldiers screamed as they fell. It's about time. Within the steel fortress, Wang Chong glanced outside the walls. As he listened to the din of battle, a faint and profound smile appeared on his lips. What's wrong? Tong Luo, Great General Abusi, had been observing the battle, but when he heard Wang Chong's words, he immediately turned his head. If my guess is right, they should be making their move right about now. Wang Chong softly chuckled. What? Abusi's face froze in surprise. Your Highness means that An Lushan has some hidden move? Wang Chong waved his sleeve and lightly said, This isn't enough to break the walls. An Lushan should understand this, and if this is the extent of his plans, then I've greatly overestimated him. Someone who the men in black had assigned as their spokesperson, who had been chosen by the world consciousness as the child of the world, naturally couldn't be this incapable. Wang Chong was keenly aware that An Lushan had more strength than he was showing right now. Whoosh! At this moment, an eagle shot into the steel fortress like an arrow, and a few moments later, a messenger rushed over to Wang Chong. Your Highness, a report from General Shui. Please inspect it. In addition, the Crown Prince's junior guardian has sent word that everything is ready, and they can carry out your Highness's command at any time. The messenger got down on one knee and offered up the letter he had just received with both hands. Wang Chong took the letter from the messenger, and after glancing at it, he smiled. Everything is ready. All that is lacking is the east wind. And Lushan, you're the only one left. Let me see what makes you dare to rebel and attempt to destroy the great Tang. Wang Chong placed his hands behind his back, his expression unfathomable as he looked north toward the Alliance army. Hurry up, you pieces of trash. Hurry up. Did you not hear Milord's order? If you end up delaying Milord, all of you will be executed. As time slowly passed, furious curses could be heard from the rear of the army. In a vacant area, several hundred men in black had split up into tensome groups. From the sky, they appeared to be drawing something. These were clearly massive formations. In front of these men in black, a man who appeared to be leading them flailed a black whip that was more than 100 feet long. Clap! A whip cracked on the body of a man in black who was moving a little too slowly, the thorns on the whip tearing open his robes and leaving a bloody wound. Not even stellar energy had been able to stop this whip. The man in black instantly shivered in pain and gasped, letting out a pained groan. Hurry! Hurry! It's your turn now. Start pouring in stellar energy. The leader of these men in black pointed his whip at the thousands of Alliance soldiers who had been waiting on the side. These people felt their breathing stop, and fear appeared on their faces. But they quickly came forward and began to pour their stellar energy into the formations at their feet. As they poured in more stellar energy, the formations began to swell in power. Boom! With a series of booms, the earth trembled. The formation at the very center exploded with energy and swiftly began to turn. A storm of energy stirred up around it. The formations began to activate in quick succession, tensome formations lighting up and beginning to turn. As these formations activated, the temperature began to drop. Behind the formation, the snowstorms across Yuzhou began to gather, quickly combining into a giant blizzard that filled the world. In the blink of an eye, the snowstorm drawn out from Yuzhou combined with the snow produced by the formations and howled toward the battlefield. Snow instantly engulfed the world. An icy mist stirred once more. It's finally begun. Within the steel fortress, Wang Chong narrowed his eyes, slowly looking up as he muttered to himself. When things were abnormal, evil was afoot. There was no doubt that Yuzhou had begun to move. Bang! As these thoughts ran through his mind, cries of alarm rang out, but rather than from outside, these cries came from the inside of the fortress. Reporting! A few moments later, a messenger frantically rode over. Your Highness, it's bad. There's chaos in the fortress. The soldiers of the 7th unit went crazy for some reason and started attacking our own men. They're also charging at the gates. The generals can't deal with it and are asking your Highness for help. What? Absurd. How many people do they have? Yet they can't deal with this. Wuxia was enraged by this report. Orders were as weighty as mountains, and those who defied them were executed. This was the most important military law in the Great Tang, and this sort of mutiny had never happened in the army before. General, there aren't many of them, only 200 some, but they are extremely strong. Our soldiers are incapable of stopping them, even the commandants. The messenger lowered his head, cold sweat on his forehead. Bastard! Wuxia's face turned ashen as he clenched his fists. King of foreign lands, stay here while I deal with this. Mutiny in the army was an immense humiliation. Wang Chong was the commander of the army, so he could not leave, and he needed to preside over the rest of the battle. Wuxia was the only person available. Moreover, when the Tongluo joined the Great Tang, Emperor Taizong had granted the post of Tongluo Great General the authority of a military judge, tasking them with dealing with mutiny in the army. After saying this, Wuxia strode away, swiftly making his way toward the turmoil. Wuxia could only walk a few steps before someone called him back. There's no need. King of foreign lands? Wuxia turned in surprise toward Wang Chong, who was still standing beneath the massive dragon banner. Mutiny among the troops would have an enormous effect on the army's morale, and it would have to be taken care of quickly to limit its effects on the overall army. Hey, Great General, the Great Tang's military law is the strictest on the continent, and you and I have always been harsh disciplinarians. Do you really think a mutiny could take place in the army? Would several hundred mutinous soldiers really be able to cause so much chaos, even break through so many checkpoints and make for the gate? Wang Chong was relaxed and confident. his young eyes shining with a profound light. Wuxia trembled in shock. He was one of the supreme great generals of the world, and though he spent most of his time guarding the imperial city, he had his own extraordinary traits that let him stand out from the rest of the crowd. As a great general facing a sudden mutiny, he immediately thought about pacifying the rebellion and calming the rest of the army, giving the matter no deeper thought. It was only Wang Chong's comment that made him realize how suspicious this was. This was the forward base with a garrison of 700,000 soldiers. Let alone 200, 2,000 or even 20,000 mutinous soldiers would barely be able to stir a wave. Pacifying this rebellion should have taken an instant. Such a force never would have been able to threaten the gate. Ordinary soldiers didn't have this kind of strength. After saying these words, Wang Chong put aside Wuxia. "Thank you for your trouble." Wang Chong smiled at the messenger soldier and then suddenly grabbed at him. This sudden action shocked Wuxia and his other subordinates. But even more astonishing was the messenger's reaction. "Hua!" The messenger grimaced upon seeing Wang Chong snatch at him, and he hastily retreated. He moved with incredible speed, and his body suddenly swelled with energy, far more than he had before. But in front of Wang Chong it didn't matter how strong he was. The moment Wang Chong took action, it was foreordained that he would not escape. Boom! A powerful pull came from Wang Chong's hand, causing the messenger to fly from the ground and toward Wang Chong. Roar! The messenger paled and let out an inhuman roar. His bones clacked and groaned as he grew larger. In a flash, the armor he wore exploded off his body, revealing rock-hard muscle. Even his face began to change, his skin cracking open and falling off like pieces of paper. Beneath the face was a completely different one. Seeing that he couldn't escape, the man let out a howl, black energy seething around him as his fingers took the form of a hook and lunged at Wang Chong. Impudent! Even great General Wuxia was shaken by this sight. Clang! He shot forward, his saber leaving its sheath and unleashing a wave of saber energy at that messenger. By now, he understood that this messenger was not one of their own. Such audacity! Wuxia's face was ashen. He had never imagined that someone would be so bold as to disguise themselves as one of their soldiers and try to deceive Wang Chong. But Wang Chong was even faster than Wuxia. Humph! With a cold snort, Wang Chong closed his fingers, seizing the messenger by a neck. With another clench and a sharp snap, that man in black who had transformed into a half-Lu Wu had his neck snapped and fell limply to the ground. The battle had lasted less than a second. The man in black had used all his stellar energy in one attack against Wang Chong, but it had been completely blocked by Wang Chong's stellar energy barrier, not even creating a tiny ripple. The destructive fire of Lu Wu was also useless, in fact even being absorbed by Wang Chong. All of his resistance had been futile. Clang! At this moment, Wuxia walked out from behind Wang Chong and used his saber to shift aside the remnants of armor on that messenger, revealing the black robe beneath. There was a look of understanding in Wuxia's eyes, and then a complicated mixture of emotions. "This man was one of those people you spoke of?" Wuxia said. Wang Chong gave a slight nod. While the men in black might have been a secret in the past, they were certainly not one now. "What do we do now?" Wuxia said, his brows creased in worry. Ordinary rebellions were easy to deal with, but the mysterious men in black made the situation much more complicated. "There's no need to worry. I've already made arrangements. Let them be." Surprisingly, Wang Chong waved his hand and softly chuckled. Plans were made, then action was taken. The men in black were extremely skilled in disguise, and he naturally knew that they would try to infiltrate his army. So how could he not make preparations? In the end, it was just a matter of who was the better schemer. There's no need to worry about the men in black. Pay more attention to the front line. Since Yuzhou has activated these men, they probably have another trick up their sleeve. Wang Chong smiled, his expression remaining relaxed. Wuxia had been rather concerned, but Wang Chong's assured manner, after some initial shock, caused him to smile. This truly was the case. The one next to him was the #1 war saint whose stratagems reigned supreme. With him here, what did he have to worry about? The mutiny in the fortress seemed sudden, but it had probably all been in his calculations. I'll go to the front to oversee the army and guard against any mishaps. In addition, when you need it, my 20,000 Tongluo cavalry are ready to move out, Abusi sternly said. Wang Chong nodded. He looked toward the northeast, where the skies were gloomy and cold winds howled. Though others had yet to sense anything, Wang Chong could smell the salty scent of the ocean in the wind. Wang Chong's eyes flashed, but he continued to act like nothing had happened, and turned to look back at the Alliance army. Meanwhile, near the fortress gates, roar, an inhuman roar resounded. As the Alliance army attacked the fortress from the outside, within the fortress, several hundred half-Lu Wus and Black Flame Azuras charged toward the gates, moving through the army with incredible speed. These men in black were incredibly strong, tearing down all opposition in their way. None of the Tang soldiers seemed capable of stopping them. Ah! The Tang soldiers screamed as their armor was shattered, the men in black sending them flying into the distance with just one thrust from their palms. Don't fight! One of the men in black at the front, who appeared to be their leader, glanced at the subordinates behind him and called out, "Push them aside and open the gate to let in Lushan's army in." As he spoke, he once more thrust out his palm. Stellar energy and the fire of Mara howled out, sending several dozen Tang soldiers flying. These Tang soldiers were all elites, able to defeat any of the Alliance soldiers one-on-one, but they were only good for battles with fellow mortals. In front of the servants of the gods, these so-called elites might as well have been clay dogs, not even able to take one strike. Boom boom boom. Thousands of Tang soldiers were knocked aside, the men in black completely scattering the defensive formations in front of the gate. These men in black ran along the ground like beasts, and the weapons hacking at their bodies bounced off as if they were trying to cut at stone. Turn the wheel. Pull the levers. Raise the gate and open the path. Another one of the leaders of this group of men in black pointed at the gate, the veins on his neck bulging as he roared. Roar! 7 or 8 bestial men in black immediately broke away from the group and toward the levers on the two sides of the gate. Whoosh! 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 It took only a few seconds for one of the men in black to get past the Tang army and reach the gate. A burly arm grabbed one of the long levers. Success! Nothing but ants. And they wanted to oppose us. The man in black inwardly rejoiced as he began to focus his strength to pull down the lever and raise the gate. But at this moment, the sound of a slicing sword entered his ear. Seeking death, the man in black roared, and without even turning his head, he punched out behind him. Bang! Stellar energy clashed, creating an explosion, but the results were not what was expected. An immense energy burst out and sent the man in black flying. What? The man in black grimaced and turned around in the air. He barely managed to land and yelled out as he looked behind him. At some point, a stalwart figure had appeared behind him. This man was covered entirely in armor, only his 2 eyes showing. Unlike all the other soldiers, this man wielded a heavy, black sword and wore dark golden armor. His entire body seemed to be blazing with energy that put him on an entirely different level from other elites. Those of the evil path will be punished by the heavens, the mysterious soldier in dark golden armor said, his eyes cold as muffled sounds came from under his armor. As he spoke, secret tunnels on both sides of the gate opened with a metallic rumble, upon which hundreds of soldiers wearing the same dark golden armor emerged. On the orders of the King of Foreign Lands, the Shadow Dragon Division has been waiting here. Devils, we've been waiting. An officer wearing dark golden armor raised his heavy sword, his aura cold and icy. Behind him, the hundreds of Shadow Dragon soldiers fanned out, becoming a human wall that stood in front of the fortress gate. All of the men in black grimaced, but a moment later, their leaders turned cold, savagely laughing as their eyes flashed with sinister light. Ants that don't know their own strength. Everyone listen up. Kill them. Ants were ants, and even if they were stronger, they were just ants that were a little larger. Although these soldiers appeared extremely strong, they were no match for them. In the end, it would just make the men in black exert themselves a little more. Bang! The men in black roared and lunged at the Shadow Dragon division like beasts. At the same time, the hundreds of Shadow Dragon soldiers bellowed, their bodies seething with killing intent as they charged at the men in black. Boom! One of the black-robed leaders waved his hand, sending black stellar energy and the fire of Mara at one of the Shadow Dragon soldiers. The powerful impact immediately sent this Shadow Dragon soldier flying. The black flames seemed to have a life of their own, seeping through the chinks in the armor. Thump! The Shadow Dragon soldier dropped to the ground, his body already burned down to the bone. As expected, an ant. With this little strength, you wanted to oppose us. The black-clothed leader grimly laughed, his expression savage. But his smile wasn't able to last for long, as he soon heard a scream from next to him. The leader's face tightened as he turned and saw that 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers had formed into some kind of joint attack formation, their 3 heavy swords striking at a single man in black from different directions. The sharp swords deeply embedded themselves into the man's flesh. But what was even more striking was what those Shadow Dragon soldiers did next. As they restrained this man in black's vital points, their bodies erupted with stellar energy and a powerful pull. The energy of the fire of Lu Wu within this man's body immediately began flowing into the 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers. Boosted by this boundless energy, the Shadow Dragon soldiers swelled in power. A dazzling radiance erupted from their bodies and transformed into 3 pairs of suns and moons. The great yin-yang heaven creation art. The black-robed leader trembled, the blood draining out of his face. The great yin-yang heaven creation art had another name in the Celestial God organization, but because of Wang Chang's status as the child of destruction, its secular name had surpassed its original name. How could this be? They've all learned this evil art. The black-robed leader's eyes widened in disbelief. But there were even more shocking developments awaiting him. He quickly scanned the battlefield and saw similar events taking place elsewhere. It was not just those 3 who had learned the great yin-yang heaven creation art. In terms of individual strength, the Shadow Dragon soldiers could not match the men in black, but 3 of them were able to firmly hold down a single man in black, and with the great yin-yang heaven creation art, all of them presented a massive threat to the men in black. Thud thud thud. On this battlefield, Shadow Dragon soldiers were being blasted away, but men in black were also being killed. Both sides had their individual victories and losses, and it was difficult to say which one was the better. Damn it! That black-robed leader's expression chilled. He shot forward like a bolt of lightning, summoning his stellar energy as he thrust out his palm. Fire of Mara instantly howled out and struck those 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers. The destructive power of the fire of Mara instantly blasted back those 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers, the flames even penetrating through their armor. A moment later, the black-robed leader witnessed something shocking and terrifying. In the distance, the 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers struck by the fire of Mara swiftly rolled and stood back up. With a light pat, the horrifying fire of Mara that could melt metal was extinguished. Other than the stellar energy that had been consumed by the fire of Mara and some jolting of the internal organs, the 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers were fine. Impossible! Utterly impossible! The black-robed leader clenched his teeth, not daring to believe his eyes. These Shadow Dragon soldiers of the Great Tang had not only absorbed the Lu Wu energy of the men in black, they also had some resistance to the fire of Mara. Crack crack! The sound of cracking bones rang out. The 3 Shadow Dragon soldiers clenched their fists and stared with cold and sharp eyes at the black-robed leader. Kill! The 3 of them roared as they lunged at the black-robed leader with their heavy swords. In a flash of light, the 3 dark golden swords began to burn with violet flames. Bang! The 3 heavy swords swiftly cut down, and the 3 soldiers began to battle with the black-robed leader. Boom boom boom! Stellar energy rumbled and shockwaves swept out as the seemingly unstoppable men in black finally ran into an obstacle. At the start, the Shadow Dragon soldiers had been somewhat unfamiliar with their new powers, even suffering significant losses. But the great yin-yang heaven creation art and joint attack formation Wangchong had given them soon began to show results. As the saying went, 2 fists found it hard to fight against 4 hands, and not even a hero could win when outnumbered. The Shadow Dragon division soon had the upper hand, And with the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art's ability to absorb stellar energy, the men in black quickly found their advantage dissipating. It took only a few seconds for the tides to turn. As this fierce battle ensued on the other side of the walls, clang, 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 several palm-sized plates of metal with complicated formations carved onto them were dropped to the ground. Unnoticed, several officers of the Alliance army sent streams of stellar energy into these three small formations. There was a metallic clatter as the three formations lit up and began to operate. The icy mist around the fortress instantly became 10 times more concentrated. Enough! The illusion formation is already working. The other teams also seem to have succeeded. Let's withdraw, one of the officers whispered. The three of them were only one of the teams that had stealthily moved up to the walls. The surging mist around them made it clear that the others had succeeded. Without delay, these people immediately began to draw back. As these officers finished their formations, in the rear of the army, "Is it all ready?" a muscular man in heavy armor bellowed. Amidst the vast sea of soldiers that was the Alliance army, this sort of roar was practically inaudible. At this moment, anyone who saw the situation in front of this man would feel their hearts chill. In front of this stalwart soldier were rows of imposing generals from all the other countries. For several dozen generals of the Alliance to be gathered here while a fierce battle was taking place was extremely weird. Everyone, remember, there will be only one chance. Failure is not permitted, the leading general harshly said. Yes, everyone yelled back, their eyes viciously fixed on the steel fortress. A moment later, a wild gust blew past, roiling the mist. Behind them, the imposing silhouettes of catapults could be seen in the mist. But compared to other catapults, these were clearly much smaller. Moreover, several areas had been modified and reinforced. These catapults were clearly meant for a short range. These catapults were built for the purpose of this plan, and they were meant to throw people, not stones. The generals swiftly boarded the catapults. The defenses of the Tang steel fortress were far too powerful. Ordinary methods could not break them, so this team of generals had been formed. No matter how powerful the Tang defenses were, ordinary soldiers were still no match for generals. Boom, boom, boom. With thunderous booms, the several dozen Alliance generals, curled up into balls, flew through the air and began to approach the walls with astonishing speed. Kill! A Gogrian general descended through the snowy mist. After landing, he uncurled his body, flourished his 4 long sabers, and immediately lunged at a Tang soldier. More generals came right behind him, and the walls fell into chaos. A few moments later, a panicked messenger rushed over to Wang Chong in the center of the fortress. Reporting, Your Highness, bad news. A force of generals has appeared on the walls. Our soldiers can't hold. Behind Wang Chong, his subordinates grimaced. Your Highness, this general will take some men to deal with it. Guizi stepped forward, his voice determined and his face grave. Any low-level general appearing in a battle between ordinary soldiers would always be able to cause chaos, let alone a force of generals. The city defense division was incapable of stopping them, and if nothing were done, the consequences did not bear imagining. Go! Wang Chong quickly said, waving his hand. Yes. Guizi bowed and quickly departed. The Great Tang was not lacking in middle-level generals compared to the Alliance, and forming a force of generals was not difficult. As Wang Chong watched Guizi's team leave, he narrowed his eyes in thought. The battle at the front continued, and the ballistae continued to fire on and bring down the ice bridges. But the collapse of the ice bridges could not stop the frenzied assault of the Alliance soldiers. The ice bridges that the She Queen had used all her strength to form were far sturdier than anticipated. The mist was continuing to thicken and surge toward the walls. Wang Chong thoughtfully observed this. Trying to hide it only makes things more conspicuous. Men in black, generals, a blizzard, these things can't break through my steel fortress. And Lushan, what are you trying to do? Wang Chong looked to the north and smirked. Though he didn't know yet what exactly was being done, he was sure that An Lushan was preparing something. Pass on my order. Have all soldiers ready for my orders. My orders are to be followed to the letter, Wang Chong declared, a profound light flitting through his eyes so quickly that it almost seemed like an illusion. Yes, Your Highness. A messenger quickly left to deliver the order. The use of formations to change the weather was not considered a weather control ability. Neither Wang Chong nor Lushan could influence this cold air stirred up by the formations. Creak. The groaning of machinery came from behind the Alliance army. Here, three bizarre, ancient, and complex machines lurked like giant beasts. The machines were covered in complicated patterns, and at the very front of these machines was a massive muzzle. Within the massive muzzle was a steel ball that was 5 to 6 meters in diameter. An invisible energy held the steel ball in the muzzle and constantly spun it. The giant steel ball radiated extremely dangerous blue rays of light that roamed about, outlining what appeared to be some sort of giant formation. Anyone here would have realized that these formations were packed with dangerous energy. Beneath the formation, within the steel ball, was a surging energy, as unstable as the magma of a volcano. It was a destructive energy that could make anyone pale. It was an unimaginably frightening power. Creak, creak, clack. As gears turned, the three terrifying and ancient machines turned their muzzles on the Tang fortress. And then they fired. Bang, bang, bang. The three giant steel balls blasted out. Kill! As Guizi was leading his men to battle with the Alliance generals on the walls, a massive steel ball suddenly plummeted out of the northeastern skies and slammed into a section of the walls. Kaboom! It was impossible to describe the power of that explosion. The earth quaked as the steel ball made impact, and the explosion drowned out all other noise. A terrifying storm of destructive energy exploded out of the steel ball, and in the face of this storm, that thick steel wall collapsed like it was made of paper. Dust plumed into the air while the shockwave from the explosion traveled several thousand feet, carrying shards of debris in every direction. And with this tremendous explosion, a massive gap more than 100 meters long was formed in the walls. Similar explosions took place on the western and central parts of the walls. For a moment, the entire world became eerily silent. Through the three massive gaps in the walls, the Tang army within the fortress and the Alliance army without silently stared at each other. At that moment, time seemed to stop. They stared at each other, none of them having expected this development. The Great Tang's steel fortress had been unimaginably sturdy, the walls reinforced with a frightening number of defensive inscriptions and formations. Besides that, beneath the fortress, Wang Chong had erected a massive formation that joined all the walls of the fortress together, making them even sturdier. To call these walls sturdier than diamond was not at all excessive. During the assault, various Alliance officers had tried to hack at the walls with their precious swords and sabers, but they had not even been able to leave a mark. This had played a large role in the Alliance army's inability to overcome the walls. But unexpectedly, after so many people had died trying to assault these walls, 3 giant holes had been easily blasted through them. Tens of thousands of soldiers stared in speechless disbelief, their eyes wide open. But beneath the giant banner of Yuzhou, An Lushan flourished his saber and smiled. Ha ha ha! Success! Divine Works Elder, you truly did not disappoint me. And Lushan heartily laughed as he saw those 3 massive gaps. What did it matter if Wang Chong had set up a fortress in the Tsang province? It still couldn't stop him. Without these tall walls, the Great Tang had nothing else that could stop him. These 3 giant gaps were 3 gates leading to victory. Humph, these 3 steel balls were originally energy sources for recreating the world. If not for the fact that this kind of energy is extremely unstable, requiring the steel balls to be reinforced with formations, they would have been used long ago. This is the greatest aid heaven can give you in this battle. The path is open. Child of the world, it's up to you now. The Divine Works Elder waved his sleeve, his face exuding pride. He was not at all surprised by this scene. These were originally supposed to be used in the purification plan, items that only the Supremes were allowed to use. To use them to help An Lushan open up a hole in the walls was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But heaven regarded this battle with extreme importance and would not permit failure. so he had no choice but to use them. Ha. Okay. And Lushan's armor trembled, his eyes erupting with a sharp light. Pass on my order. All soldiers move out. Boom. A horn blared, and the entire Yuzhou army began to move. Ha. And Lushan, you truly are the child of heaven's will. My sons, charge. The Khitan king excitedly laughed, his thick beard trembling. The Khitans were not skilled at assaulting cities. What they desired were intense melees. Hear my order. Prepare to assault the city. Yun Gaisaman pulled out several of his pitch-black sabers with a clang, his body erupting with fighting intent. He had been far too restrained in the previous battles. This was exactly the moment he had been looking forward to. He. Pass on my order. Prepare to attack and wipe out the Great Tang. All soldiers, prepare to move out. The wounded Shi Queen and Osmishkagan also gave out their orders to attack. Ruor. Receiving this order, the Alliance army rallied, their thick killing intent soaring to the heavens. Bong bong bong. The sound of the war drums began to once more rumble across the battlefield. This time, the entire army pressed forward, and their momentum caused the icy mist to surge in their direction. Rumble. At the front of the armies, the rows of shield carts formed a long silver line that rapidly advanced. Even in the midst of this intense battle, the Alliance had not forgotten to guard against the Great Tang's nightmarish ballistae. Farther in the rear, the various armies swiftly took up formation. Tens of thousands of cavalry gathered into concentrated formations across from the three large gaps. Kyle! With this loud cry, the earth began to tremble. The Alliance cavalry joined the infantry, spearmen, and shield soldiers in an earth-shaking bellow as they all charged at the Tang army. Whoosh! As the army began to move, the howling winds once more began to move toward the fortress. Within the fortress, Wang Chong half closed his eyes, standing motionless beneath the Tang banner. So that's what it was. Energy cores. To think that heaven would even give something like this to you for the sake of victory. As Wang Chong opened his eyes, a bright light gleamed within them. The explosion had come abruptly, and there had been some formation that had disrupted the senses. By the time Wang Chong had realized, the explosion had already happened. He hadn't even had a chance to stop it. But during the explosion, Wang Chong had sensed a familiar energy, the sensation of an energy core. On his journey to the Caspian Sea, during his encounter with Firmament Supreme, Wang Chong had found that the men in black were using this sort of crystallized energy core to provide energy for a space-time teleportation gate. This sort of crystal contained an unimaginably vast sea of energy. The only problem was that this kind of energy was extremely unstable. But this instability made this sort of energy the best weapon for Lushan to use against Wang Chong's walls. Even though Wang Chong's steel fortress had been reinforced with so many inscriptions and formations, it was nothing in front of this high-class energy core. Wang Chong knew that Lushan had to have some way of breaking through his walls, but he had not expected that it would be an energy core. Kill! Wang Chong could hear the cries of the 2 million Alliance soldiers as they charged at the steel fortress, sounding like a roaring tsunami. Next to Wang Chong, countless soldiers panicked. The collapse of 3 parts of the wall had completely disrupted their preparations. The city defense division was now completely useless, and the situation was now extremely disadvantageous. But when they saw how composed and confident Wang Chong was, they quickly calmed down. 5,000 feet, 3,000 feet. The distance rapidly closed, and those in the fortress could feel the vibrations created by the charging army. It would be just a few more moments until the Alliance army reached the fortress. At such a close distance, ballistae were no longer effective. As for the defensive measures used previously, they had also been rendered ineffective. Wang Chong placed his hands behind his back and coldly said, "It's finally begun." As he looked forward, a faint smile appeared on his lips. The walls had been destroyed, but Wang Chong was so relaxed that it seemed like nothing had happened. Delish! His fingers trembled, and a small, triangular flag that was a few inches tall flew out from between his fingers and landed on the nearby model. Tell Abusi that he can start getting ready. Yes. Wang Chong's attitude was infectious, and the surrounding soldiers quickly calmed. A messenger departed to convey the message. Rumble. A moment later, just as the Alliance army was about to charge into the fortress, the Tang army shifted formations. Before the Alliance army could react, tens of thousands of Tang cavalry emerged, appearing at the three gaps so quickly that it seemed like they had come out of thin air. They were all in neat formation, as motionless as mountains. It was as if they had been waiting here this entire time, waiting exactly for a development like this. Ni! War horses cried out in alarm as countless Alliance soldiers were shaken by this sight. These Tang soldiers were far too calm, so calm that they seemed like rocks that had weathered the beating of endless waves. Compared to the bellowing Alliance army, these cavalry were cold and silent statues. This stark contrast with the Alliance army only made them seem more intimidating. With these three forces of Tang cavalry at the three gaps, the Great Tang had three additional defense lines. And behind these three cavalry forces were the 20,000 Tongluo cavalry, lined up in a row. In the center and to the back was Wuxia, his motionless body seething with energy. King of foreign lands, leave this place to me for now. I won't let them take half a step into this fortress. As Wuxia spoke, energy erupted from his body. Wuxia's eyes were harsh and cruel, his aura cold. He appeared like a merciless Azura that had walked out of the depths of the underworld. The Tongluo lived for battle. Dangerous situations stimulated the fighting intent in the depths of every Tongluo, and this was even more true for the leader of the Tongluo, Wuxia. Okay. Wang Chong laughed. For this war, besides the 20,000 Tongluo cavalry, Wang Chong had also placed the 80,000 most veteran cavalry under Wuxia's command. Though the Tongluo were elites, second in fighting power only to Wang Chong's Wuxian cavalry, they were far too few in number, and did not have the protection of meteoric metal armor. Thus, losses they suffered on the battlefield were difficult to recover from. Wang Chong was confident that Wuxia could maximize the power of the 80,000 veterans and make up for the Tongluo cavalry's lack of numbers. Meanwhile, despite their shock, the Alliance army continued to charge. Kill them all. Seize the king of foreign lands, and no one left in the Great Tang will be able to oppose us. Master has ordered that the one who kills the king of foreign lands will be made a king with a fief. With heaven-shaking war cries, the soldiers approached the three gaps. The distance was growing smaller and smaller. 3,000 feet. Whoosh! At this moment, Tongluo Great General Wuxia's eyes flashed with light, and he immediately pulled out his personal sword. All soldiers charge. As he raised his sword high above his head, he gave the order to attack. Boom! The tens of thousands of Tang cavalry pulled out their swords and then fearlessly charged at the Alliance army. Clang! As they charged out, all of them heard a resounding, metallic clatter as a golden and glassy halo rapidly spread out from the feet of Wuxia. The Tongluo Great Halo. This was one of the strongest cavalry halos on the continent, and anyone who was boosted by this halo would receive massive boosts to energy, strength, and agility. Unlike Chuluwu, Wuxia had reached a stage where he had one large and small halo fused together. This combined halo was far more formidable than Chuluwu's. After a distance of 100 feet, all the cavalry had already reached 5 times their original speed. After 300 feet, the cavalry were at 60% the speed of the opposing cavalry. At 500 feet, the cavalry were all equal to the speed of the Alliance cavalry. At 1,000 feet, the cavalry had charged out of the fortress and were now at twice the maximum speed of the opposing cavalry. Hua! The Alliance cavalry fell into greater turmoil at this sight. This is impossible. The eyes of countless soldiers widened in fear. All of the cavalry were at maximum speed, and there was no going any faster. Moreover, attempting to change direction would come at a great cost, with the horses and their riders having a chance of being heavily injured by their inertia. Different forces of cavalry would have different maximum speeds, but the difference would normally not be that great, ranging between 30 and 60%. But the Great Tang cavalry was charging at twice their speed, something that seemed totally inconceivable. Even the elite cavalry felt like they had seen a ghost. Yet in the rear, Wuxia seemed utterly unperturbed. This was the power of a peak-level Tongluo Great Halo. It was no longer a simple boost to the strength, speed, and agility of cavalry. Its most important attribute was that it could increase the maximum speed of a charge. This was one of the reasons the Tongluo cavalry had had a place next to Emperor Taizong and had been so renowned. King of foreign lands, my thanks. Abusi's eyes flickered as he recalled a conversation he had had not too long ago with Wang Chong. It was a conversation that had taken place not long after Wang Chong had arrived at the forward base, when the steel fortress had yet to be erected. Great General, I have something here that His Majesty gave to me as I was leaving. It is connected to the Tongluo Great Halo and might prove useful to Great General. When they were on patrol and away from the others, Wang Chong had ridden up to Abusi and passed him a piece of paper covered in writing. The Tongluo Great Halo? Abusi had been confused at first. The Tongluo Great Halo was a secret passed down through the generations of the Tongluo tribe and had been well preserved. He understood all of its contents thoroughly. Why would the new emperor be giving him something linked to the Tongluo Great Halo? But decrees could not be defied, so Abusi took it without a second thought. Once he returned to his tent and opened up the paper, he immediately sensed something strange. The words on this paper were not written in some ancient script, but in the handwriting of the current era, and the writer was clearly Wang Chong. Abusi had once been opposed to Wang Chong due to his son, Abu Tong, particularly during the rebellion of the Three Princes, where the Tongluo had been on the verge of joining the first prince. Strictly speaking, they were still enemies. Thus, unlike others, Abusi had gathered a great deal of information concerning Wang Chong. And unlike others, Abusi was able to use his connection to the imperial household to gather information that many others could not, including Wang Chong's letters. Abusi had been able to almost instantly recognize Wang Chong's handwriting. Wang Chong had clearly written this letter, so why had he claimed that the new emperor had given it to him? At this time, Abusi began to seriously peruse the contents of the letter. But to his surprise, Abusi found that the letter really was connected to his Tongluo Great Halo. Moreover, it filled in a flaw in the halo that had been so subtle that not even he had noticed, boosting the Tongluo Great Halo to its new, current level of power. As for why Wang Chong had claimed that it was from the new emperor, in the end, it was to maintain the dignity of the Tongluo. Considering his former quarrels with Wang Chong, Abusi couldn't help but sigh. Wang Chong had far too many secrets. There was no question that the Tongluo had initially chosen the wrong enemy. Fortunately, the Tongluo had reacted quickly, and during the rebellion of the Three Princes, they had defected and joined Wang Chong. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Being friends with Wang Chong was far more comfortable than being enemies. No one was willing to make an enemy of someone like Wang Chong, and no one could accept the responsibility. As these thoughts ran through his mind, Abusi quickly turned his focus back to the battle. Boom! With a heaven-shaking boom, the tens of thousands of Tang cavalry gathered into the arrow formation. With the power of the Tongluo Great Halo, they thrust into the Alliance army like a sharp sword. Nay! Kyle! Horses neighed as armor clattered and weapons clashed. After a brief clash, the dense ranks of the Alliance army were torn through, the riders screaming as they were sent hurtling through the air by the frightening impact. At the moment of impact, these cavalry had already had their bones and muscles snapped, their organs turned into pulp. The impact from the two armies charging against each other was not something the average person could bear. Hold! Hold! Hurry and stop them! No one is allowed to retreat. Charge! Retreat means execution. One of the Alliance generals was both alarmed and infuriated. With a wave of his sword, he executed an Alliance soldier whose horse had taken fright and taken a few steps back. But none of this could stop the chaos in the army. The three forces of Tang cavalry pushed unstoppably through the Alliance army, sowing chaos wherever they went. 10 paces, 100 paces, 1,000 paces, the three Tang cavalry penetrated deeper and deeper into the Alliance army, spreading the chaos wider and wider. The Alliance cavalry was constantly pushed back, the warhorses neighing in fear. Even that rebuking general was swept up in the tide of chaos and pushed back. And things were far from over. Within the fortress, Tongluo Great General Abusi's eyes chilled. Though he could see that his army had the upper hand in the charge and this clash, Abusi had no intention of letting his foes catch their breath. A cavalry charge was like a massive wave. It had to come ceaselessly, giving no chance for the opponent to breathe. They needed to strike while the iron was hot and utterly crush the foe. This had always been the Tongluo cavalry's style. All soldiers charge. Abusi narrowed his eyes as a beam of energy erupted from his body and soared into the sky. Abusi leaned forward and charged forward like an arrow from its bow. Tongluo! 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 Gallop! Their roars shaking the heavens. The 20,000 Tongluo cavalry shot forward like bolts of lightning, joining Abusi in charging out of the fortress. For seconds, in only 4 seconds, Abusi's 20,000 Tongluo cavalry reached an inconceivable speed and crashed into the Alliance army. Ah! With a chorus of screams, the cavalry at the very front crumbled like they were made of paper, sent flying more than 100 feet into the air by the Tongluo cavalry before crashing several dozen feet away in the ranks of the army. The Tongluo did not exceed 10,000, and they were invincible above 10,000. At this moment, there were 20,000 Tongluo cavalry. With Abusi personally commanding them, they exhibited the strength that had made them the supreme force of cavalry in the pre-Wuxian cavalry world. Boom! With one strike, at least 8,000 Alliance soldiers were blasted into the sky. Before the Alliance cavalry had even hit the ground, they were already dead. 16,000, 34,000, 50,000. In the space of a few seconds, the Alliance had already lost 50,000 elite cavalry, and the losses were continuing to climb. All soldiers, arrow formation. Charge! Abusi's roar was like a rumble of thunder, and as it exploded over the sky, it stirred up a fierce gale. Nay! The 3 Tang forces of cavalry immediately changed directions and began charging toward the Tongluo cavalry. Thud thud thud. As collisions rang out, the 3 forces comprising 80,000 veterans penetrated through the Alliance army and joined together with the Tongluo cavalry in a giant arrow formation. The arrow formation had Abusi's Tongluo cavalry forming the tip while the other soldiers formed the wings. An arrow formation of 100,000 men was an arrow of unprecedented size and a massive threat to the Alliance army. This was particularly true for Abusi's Tongluo cavalry. Although there were only 20,000 of them, they charged with the momentum of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Ah! Screams continued to rise up from the battlefield as the center of the Alliance army was completely run through. The Alliance cavalry were in complete disarray, and the chaos spread from the center to the flanks. Swish! A saber flashed and blood gushed out. A she-horseman, his horse, and his weapon were all sliced through by a Tongluo horseman. This she-horseman died on the spot, but his remains were carried another 10-some meters by his inertia. The Tongluo cavalry's equipment could not compare to the Wuxian cavalry's, but a great deal of time and energy had been put into their weapons and armor. This was one of the important reasons the Tongluo cavalry were restricted in number. When it came to the toughness of their armor and the sharpness of their weapons, the Tongluo cavalry were only second to the Wuxian cavalry. Even the Arabian Mamelukes were somewhat inferior. Thud thud thud. Warhorses collided with warhorses, weapons clashed against weapons, and halos resonated against halos. Bodies thudded to the ground, and in the space of a few moments, Abusi's army had killed more than 100,000 soldiers. In the distance, the leaders of the Alliance grimaced. Although Lushan had used the heavy weaponry provided by the men in black to blast open the Great Tang's walls, the Tang cavalry had gone on the offensive. It was more like it was the Alliance who had had its defenses blasted open. This left them flabbergasted and infuriated. For a moment, their expressions were truly wondrous to behold. Attack! At the front line, Tai Chi Bilili, who had been waiting in the rear around 10,000 feet away, suddenly urged his horse into a gallop. Behind him, boom! The 30,000-some cavalry of the Golden Wolf army radiated a cold and callous energy as they charged forward. The sight of the 30,000 cavalry moving as a single unit was an awesome sight to behold. Clang clang clang. As the 30,000 soldiers of the Golden Wolf army moved out, their tens of thousands of war halos erupted from under their feet. 30,000 war halos each stood on their own but also resonated with each other. The Golden Wolf Formation. This was the renowned and top-class formation of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, and it was also the formation that Taichi Bilili had used to contend against Zhang Shogui's Roaring Tiger army time and time again, thwarting Zhang Shogui's ambitions. 100 feet. Roar! The space above the Golden Wolf army distorted, and then a savage golden wolf head manifested, howling at the sky. The moment this giant wolf head appeared, the 30,000 Golden Wolf cavalry seemed to be plated in gold. This special light seeped into their armor, making the Golden Wolf army appear like they were equipped with divine armor. The Golden Wolf army's defensive strength was boosted by 2 to 3 times. Moreover, the golden light also spread to their weapons, increasing the sharpness of their Golden Wolf sabers. On the steppe, the golden in Golden Wolf army actually meant golden steel. Rumble. The earth rumbled as the 30,000 Golden Wolf horsemen charged with the momentum of an avalanche. The Alliance army rallied at this sight, and Lushan subtly nodded. It was not for no reason that the Eastern Turkic Khaganate was able to contend against the Western Turkic Khaganate. As Gao Shang observed the battlefield, his eyes flickered. He turned to the Khitan King and said, "Khitan King, the Tongluo cavalry are extremely strong, and in the past, they were known as the world's #1 cavalry force. While the Golden Wolf army is powerful, it is not enough to defeat the Tongluo cavalry. I must trouble the Khitan King to mobilize one of your 8 elite divisions. A lion would use its full strength to hunt even a rabbit." Gao Shang did not dare to underestimate the Tongluo cavalry. Okay. The Khitan King immediately agreed to Gao Shang's request, and he turned to a Khitan general at his side. "Pass on my order. Mobilize the Sun Rider tribe's Sunchasur cavalry." The Khitan tribe was divided into 8 divisions, and the Sun Rider tribe was the most elite division. As for the Sunchasur cavalry, it was the Sun Rider tribe's cream of the crop. There were around 7,000 of them, each one carefully selected. They were also the cavalry the Khitan King had selected to be his royal guard. Rumble. As the Khitan King gave his order, a howling snowstorm came out from behind the army, and in the middle of this army, amidst the clattering of armor, a baleful energy shook the heavens. Nay! In a flash of light, the snowy mist parted, and a man more than 8 feet tall rode out, appearing like a fiendish god wearing heavy armor and a cape of beast fur on his shoulders. That man's eyes swept over his surroundings. A moment later, whoosh! All of the surrounding Khitan cavalry drew away in fright. In the distance, the cavalry of the other countries were also frightened, and looked away. The northeast was a region in which numerous factions interacted. Besides the Great Tang, the countries also fought with each other. The majority of those who were able to survive this sort of battlefield, who had been tempered in blood and fire, were elites. But this Khitan force was different. Fierce was no longer enough to describe them. In their eyes, one could see a bestial energy, as if they were looking for their next prey. This was an extremely bloodthirsty, crazed, and dangerous force. Thud thud thud. Behind this leading Khitan horseman, even more Khitan cavalry emerged, all of them wearing the same kind of armor and all of them 8 feet tall. Whoosh! The surrounding soldiers grew even more disorderly at the sight of these cavalry. Out of the way! Hurry! It's the Sun Rider tribe! The surrounding soldiers yelled as they backed away. Among the 8 divisions of the Khitan tribe, the Sun Rider tribe was even more renowned than the Golden Wolf army. It wasn't because of their fighting strength, but because they would really eat people on the battlefield. In the eyes of the countries of the northeast, each member of the Sunchasur cavalry was a living devil. He-hey! The leader of the Sunchasur cavalry looked at the reactions from the surrounding soldier and disdainfully smiled, revealing his white teeth. Though I've eaten so many horsemen, I've truly never tasted the flesh of the Great Tang's Tongluo cavalry. Such strong soldiers should taste rather good. The leader of the Sunchasur cavalry savagely laughed. Turning away from the surrounding horsemen, he looked across the battlefield at the Tongluo cavalry that were tearing through his allies. The Sunchasur cavalry had an obsession with conquering strong opponents, and not even the Khitan King had been able to control it. Hiya! The Sunchasur cavalry leader suddenly spurred his horse into a gallop and shot forward like a cannonball. As if this was some kind of starting signal, boom. The 7,000 Sunchasur cavalry rode out like savage devils, approaching the battlefield with inconceivable speed. As Lushan observed this intense battle, his eyes gleamed. Finally relaxing a little, he sent a stream of psychic energy to Gaoshang. Tell Tianqianjin that it's about time for him to move out. After a moment of hesitation, Gaoshang nodded. The reputation of the Tongluo cavalry was simply too great. The Golden Wolf army and the Sunchasur cavalry still might not be enough to suppress them. Tianqianjin was already at the front, and if he joined his forces to the others, the chances of success would be much greater. Gaoshang quickly made a gesture, and an order was sent to the front. Tianqianjin immediately led out his tens of thousands of Dark Shadow soldiers in a charge at the Tongluo cavalry. Rumble! The entire battlefield shuddered. As these three armies moved out, Yun Geiseman turned and whispered to a Gogrian general at his side, "Pass on my order. Have the Golden Crow Division prepare to move out." The mention of the Golden Crow Division made the general shiver, but he swiftly lowered his head and bowed. Yes. He swiftly turned to leave. The three-legged Golden Crow. This was the ancient god venerated by all of the Goguryeo Empire. The division that held the name of the Golden Crow was the most elite army in all of Goguryeo. But this army was not cavalry. On the contrary, it was a force specifically meant for countering cavalry. In previous battles, this army had relied on its terrifying offensive capabilities to slaughter numerous infantry and cavalry. Even when cavalry was charging at full speed, Goguryeo's Golden Crow division dared to charge against them, relying on their frightening saber arts to slaughter all the cavalry they faced. Following Yun Geiseman's order, a Goguryean force on the northeast corner of the battlefield slowly began to move forward. Unlike the Sunchasur cavalry or Golden Wolf army, these soldiers were not so muscular or tall. They were generally around 6 feet tall, and they all wore specially crafted and somewhat strange armor. They each had 3 pitch-black sabers on their back with extremely thin and long blades, and their bodies were brimming with energy. But most striking of all was the symbol of the 3-legged Golden Crow on their left breast. "Brothers, it's our time." The Gogrian general leading them coldly laughed as he fixed his eyes on the Tongluo cavalry. His body shifted around, his joints crisply cracking. The killing intent in the air began to thicken. "Your Highness, and Lushan has made his move," Zhang Ke called out, watching those 3 plumes produced by those cavalry forces with worry in his eyes. There was no doubting the power of the Tongluo cavalry, but the alliance had many elite soldiers under it. If several of these elite armies worked together, they could pose a major threat to the Tongluo cavalry. Most importantly, the other side had sent 2 great generals. Wang Chong merely smiled. War was not so simple that one could just pile on numbers, and Lushan and the alliance would have to work a little harder if they wanted to win. Before Wang Chong could even speak, a foot stomped down, and an imposing figure appeared behind Wang Chong. "King of foreign lands, let this old man go." That fiend was created by this old man, so this old man will personally correct it. Zhang Shogui looked through the gaps in the walls toward that figure standing beneath the banner of Yuzhou, his eyes burning with hatred. Ever since he had fallen for Lushan's trap and been demoted to the Core province, he had spent every day and night wanting to wash away his shame. The mighty Zhang Shogui, the Anong Protector General, had not died on the battlefield to a foe, but he had been deceived by a lowly man. He had failed to maintain his dignity and had become the laughingstock of the realm. This was something he had never imagined to be possible. Suffering, pain, torment. Those days he had spent biding his time made each day like a year. The more he waited, the greater his hatred grew. And all of this was for this moment, when he could finally end this traitor. Zhang Shogui thought that Wang Chong would need some more work to persuade, but to his surprise, Wang Chong chuckled and instantly agreed. "Lord Protector General, I will give you 150,000 elite infantry, including the remaining heavy infantry. In addition, I will also give you 50,000 elite cavalry. I will not give you any orders on the battlefield. I have only one request. Defeat the enemy and kill at least 600,000 soldiers. Can milord do it? Zhang Shogui's eyes were red as he stared at the Yuzhou army, squeezing out from between his clenched teeth. Okay. Okay. Wang Chong nodded. Zhang Ke, bring me my token. I am handing command of 200,000 soldiers to Lord Zhang. Although Zhangzhou Jianxiong had the title of Tiger of the Empire, in Wang Chong's heart, there was only one person that truly deserved this title, Zhang Shogui, a Zhang Shogui that was brimming with hatred, hungry for revenge, and completely recovered was a frightening killing machine. And when it came to strategy and formations, Zhang Shogui was even more frightening than Tongluo Great General Abusi. Wang Chong had helped Zhang Shogui recover and told him to hide and wait for so long precisely so that his suppressed rage would build up to be unleashed at this moment. Not even Wang Chong knew just how frightening this sword of the empire would be. Wang Chong placed his hands behind his back and mentally remarked, Lord Zhang, it's up to you. The 200,000 soldiers quickly fell under Zhang Shogui's command. Wang Chong had even produced Zhang Shogui's banner. Whoosh! As Zhang Shogui's unique banner appeared at one of the wall gaps, it instantly drew everyone's attention. Zhang Shogui. It's Zhang Shogui. Upon seeing that armored and cold-faced god at the gap, everyone grew restless. In the distance, and Lushan, Yun Geisaman, Osmish Kagan, the Khitan King, and the Shi Queen all widened their eyes in fear, their expressions turning strange. Before and Lushan had risen to power, and Ong Protector General Zhang Shogui's reputation had resounded throughout the northeast. Even after in Lushan's ascension, Zhang Shogui's name still struck fear into the hearts of the other countries. There was no other reason. It was simply that Zhang Shogui was too powerful. Before his arrival in the northeast, although the Great Tang had held Yuzhou, it had basically not existed to the other countries battling with each other. But when Zhang Shogui took command of Yuzhou, he began to attack the other countries like a madman. Goguryeo, the Shi, the Khitans, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate. Zhang Shogui single-handedly altered the power structure of the northeast. In Zhang Shogui's wars, all of the countries lost soldiers and generals. All of them had their interiors penetrated by Zhang Shogui. This was particularly true for the Shi and the Khitans, which had almost collapsed from Zhang Shogui's sudden assault. In the end, these countries that had once attacked each other were forced to work together to resist the Great Tang and put a stop to that string of defeats. A pack of demons and monsters dares to clash weapons with this Zhang. Zhang Shogui's body seethed with killing intent that was almost tangible as he thunderously roared, silencing the battlefield. And Lushan, you treasonous son, this old man will personally end your life on this day. Zhang Shogui turned his bloodshot eyes on the distant and Lushan and Gaoshang. Zhang Shogui's killing intent and hatred had twisted his face into a savage visage that made in Lushan and Gaoshang tremble and take several steps back. Bastard! And Lushan was both shocked and afraid, his hands and legs going somewhat numb. Though he had been planning his rebellion against the Great Tang for some time, and dealing with Zhang Shogui had been part of this plan, now that he saw Zhang Shogui again, and Lushan felt an instinctive fear. This fear was like that of a mouse seeing a cat, one that was branded into his soul. That was then and this is now. Master no longer needs to fear him. Gaoshang walked up behind him and placed a hand on his back, bringing in Lushan back to his senses. And Lushan nodded, and he became both angry and vexed. He clenched his teeth and savagely ordered, Tell Cui Qianyu that he needs to kill Zhang Shogui no matter what. He can't be allowed to live any longer. Yun Geisaman, Osmish Kagan, the Shi Queen, and the Khitan King all had strange looks on their faces. Though they said nothing, they all empathized. In this war, the last person they wanted to see was Zhang Shogui. As the tyrant of the northeast, Zhang Shogui had not merely trained the Yuzhou army, he also knew the fighting styles of Goguryeo, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, the Shi, and the Khitans like the back of his hand. Unlike Wang Chong, he was extremely familiar with their strengths and weaknesses. Pass on my order. Find a way to kill Zhang Shogui. The sovereigns of the northeast swiftly gave their own orders. Meanwhile, by the walls, Zhang Shogui was ready, his body seething with killing intent. with 200,000 soldiers at his command. The Xianxia who had been tormented by illness, disappointment, and anger was now restored to that sharp blade of the empire. Xianxia pulled out his sword and bellowed, "Attack! Rumble!" The earth rumbled as 200,000 soldiers, a mixture of infantry and cavalry, swept out of the gap in a great wave. Kill! In the face of the nearly 2 million soldiers of the Alliance army, the 200,000 soldiers lunged like fierce tigers. 2,000 feet. 1,000 feet. Rumble. A moment later, the armies collided like gigantic waves. Clang. At the moment of impact, a dark black war halo, so black that it seemed to absorb light, erupted from Xianxia's feet and spread over his army. 3 halos appeared under each of the 200,000 Tang soldiers, instantly boosting their energies by several levels. With Xianxia's halo, the 200,000 Tang soldiers instantly tore a large gap through the Alliance army. Ah! In the dense ranks of the Alliance army, a Gogrian soldier was caught off guard and instantly cut down. The Tang soldier who had done the deed erupted with stellar energy and continued charging forward, blasting back 2 Yuzhou soldiers. Behind him, more Tang soldiers rushed into the gap. The Alliance soldiers were cut down like weeds. Hold! Hold! Stop them! The Alliance generals frantically yelled as they tried to hold the line. Countless shield soldiers gathered, but with a mighty boom, the defense line crumbled once more. Kill! Xianxia's eyes were bloodshot, and he radiated a baneful energy that soared to the heavens. As he waved his sword, a part of his army charged out and crushed the defense line before him. Bang! 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 Under Xianxia's command, the army of 200,000 Tang soldiers was like the incessant tide, attacking, attacking, and attacking again. Wherever there was resistance, Xianxia's army would attack. Routed! 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 The charging Alliance army crumbled under Xianxia's assault. In this frontal clash, Xianxia used no tactics, formations, or strategies. He simply had his army attack, attack, and attack again, and this was enough to thoroughly rout the Alliance army. Truly a pillar of the Great Tang. Wang Chong couldn't help but emotionally sigh at this sight. Old Ginger was still better than the new, and Xianxia deserved his reputation as one of the luminaries of the Tang military, an existence equal to Wang Zhongxi. Several months of torment and humiliation had not only failed to bring him down, the experience had stimulated a fighting power that was even more frightening than before. On the surface, Xianxia was only telling his army to attack like some brute with no skill whatsoever. But in truth, his crude commands concealed an extremely sharp sense for the battlefield. Every place he ordered his army to attack was exactly where the Alliance army was weakest. The Alliance army did not have much cohesion, and there were many openings between the various armies. Xianxia was able to notice these weak points and constantly attack them, sowing chaos and widening the gaps. Moreover, Wang Chong had given him elite soldiers, and when an army of elites attacked the enemy at their weakest, they worked with double the efficiency. The Alliance army was naturally incapable of stopping him. Rumble! The 200,000 Tang soldiers continued to push forward. Xianxia had yet to even use his cavalry, and he had already crushed the enemy. On the other side, the Alliance soldiers all paled. As for Lushan and his Yuzhou generals, they all nastily scowled. The Roaring Tiger army had already been wiped out, so they had believed that Xianxia was nothing but a toothless tiger, not much of a threat at all. But to their surprise, Xianxia's hatred had driven him to even more frightening heights, and Lushan felt his skin crawl and his heart thump at this sight. He clenched his teeth and almost crazily said, "Tian Qianjin really isn't enough. Pass on my order. Send in Cui Qianyu, Zhao Can, and Baizhen Tuoluo as well." Xianxia was far too frightening. If he were not killed, and Lushan would never be able to rest easy. "Master, you can't lose yourself," Gao Shang softly whispered, his calm and collected voice bringing Lushan back to his senses. The shadow Xianxia had left on Lushan's heart was just too great. Not even Gao Shang could change this. The other countries have already taken action. If master wants to deal with Zhang Shogui, Cui Chenyo's soldiers are enough. Although Gao Shang did not approve of using so many soldiers on Zhang Shogui, if they didn't find a way to suppress Zhang Shogui and drive away this shadow on An Lushan's heart, a panicked An Lushan would be an even greater danger to the army. Gao Shang's words proved effective. An Lushan raised his head and saw that the other countries had also begun to move their armies against Zhang Shogui. Zhang Shogui's army of 200,000 had drawn 800,000 soldiers from the alliance. As Zhang Shogui began his assault, the armies of the other countries had formed a large net that sought to wrap around Zhang Shogui's army. Although Zhang Shogui was extremely strong, the other countries had their own renowned generals. Now that Zhang Shogui had entered the fray, the other countries had swiftly made the corresponding adjustments. And Lushan finally completely calmed down. It all depends on Taichi Bililai now, Gao Shang thought to himself. An army fueled by desperate courage was bound to win. An enraged Zhang Shogui was simply too frightening, and his keen understanding of the other countries made it difficult to kill him in a short time. He could only hope for developments on the other front. There, the Golden Wolf Army, the Sunchaser Cavalry, and the Dark Shadow Cavalry were charging at Abusi's Tongluo Cavalry from 3 different angles. If they defeated the Tongluo Cavalry, the 3 elite armies together with hundreds of thousands of soldiers would be able to break through the rest of the Tang defense line and utilize the other 2 gaps to enter the fortress. At that point, no matter how fierce Zhang Shogui was, he would not be able to stand alone. Moreover, once Taichi Bililai and Tianqianjin were free, they could come around and attack Zhang Shogui from the rear. The 3 elite forces of cavalry would be enough to utterly crush Zhang Shogui's army. Wang Chong, let's see how you deal with this, Gao Shang mentally remarked. Neither Abusi nor Zhang Shogui was worth fearing. What truly made Gao Shang apprehensive was that man who had been in the rear in this entire time, standing beneath the giant banner. Wang Chong. Both Abusi and Zhang Shogui were simply executing Wang Chong's plans. This was particularly true for Zhang Shogui. Without Wang Chong's intervention, the former Anong Protector General would have been dead long ago. Wang Chong had secretly brought him to the Tsang province precisely to deal with them. But Gao Shang had a strong intuition that Wang Chong was hiding some other trump card. The Supreme War Saint could not possibly have only these few tricks. However, at this time, he still could not fathom what Wang Chong was hiding. Rumble. As Gao Shang was thinking on the distant battlefield, the elite cavalries drew closer and closer. Abusi had already noticed the 3 threats approaching him. Come, let this one see what has made you so daring as to rebel and make an enemy of the great Tang. In a flash, Abusi erupted with formidable killing intent. Clang! Raising his sword high into the air, Abusi pointed it at the 3 elite cavalry forces. All soldiers, charge with me. All those who offend the great Tang will be punished, no matter how far away they are. Abusi's expression was imposing and majestic, his voice resounding like a bell over the battlefield. Niai! The tens of thousands of Tang cavalry charged at one of the cavalry forces attacking them. Divide and conquer was one of the simplest principles of military strategy. Abusi naturally would not give his enemy the time to join together and attack him. Ha ha ha, my sons! These Tang really did pick us. The leading Khitan general licked his lips and made a bloodthirsty and savage smile. Behind him, the 7,000 Sunchaser cavalry heartily laughed, their voices filled with derision. They had encountered far too many opponents like this, believing that with their smaller numbers, they were easy pickings. But in the end, it was their opponents who had ended up dead on the battlefield. Amongst the 3 elite cavalry forces, the Sunchaser cavalry was the smallest. This was clearly why the Tang had chosen them. How should we deal with these Tang? The leading Khitan general loudly called out. Kill them all. Tear out their throats. Eat them raw. The Sunchaser cavalry laughed as they continued to charge. Correct. Kill them all. Open their eyes and let them know what it means to have the title, King of the 8 Divisions. Rumble. The 7,000 Sunchaser cavalry brazenly laughed, and rather than retreating against the Tongluo cavalry that outnumbered them by several times, they accelerated. The distance was shrinking. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. A moment later, the Sunchasur cavalry and the Tongluo cavalry, two of the world's strongest cavalry forces, smashed together. Boom! The collision of halos, horses, weapons, and armor all at once seemed to make time stop, the intense din drowning out all other noise over half of the battlefield. And after this seemingly endless moment, rumble, the dense formation of 7,000 Sunchasur cavalry had somehow managed to hold off the seemingly unstoppable charge of the Tongluo cavalry, and the two forces were like two bulls with locked horns. The Tongluo cavalry had failed to overrun the Sunchasur cavalry. The Sunchasur cavalry had not managed to break through the Tongluo cavalry. Everyone was left stunned by this sight, the sounds of battle dwindling for a few moments. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but raise an eyebrow in shock. He was well aware of the Tongluo cavalry's strength. While it was inferior to the Wuxian cavalry, it was far stronger than the vast majority of this world's elite cavalry. The Sunchasur cavalry consisted of only 7,000 men, but it had been able to stop the 20,000 Tongluo cavalry charging at full speed. Such power could leave any faction in the world shaken. This alone was enough for the Sunchasur cavalry to be proud. Ha ha ha! This is all the Tongluo amount to. I'll tear all of you apart. A muscular Sunchasur horseman at the front savagely laughed as he suddenly reached out and grabbed a Tongluo warhorse. With terrifying brute strength, he lifted the Tongluo horse together with its rider off the ground and threw them more than 60 feet away. Nearby, another Sunchasur horseman laughed and then bellowed, his abundant stellar energy and the saber in his hand slicing through the opposing Tongluo horseman's defensive barrier. He then jumped onto the back of the man's horse, opened his mouth, and then bit deeply into the Tongluo horseman's exposed neck like he was some kind of beast. Ag! The Tongluo rider screamed as blood gushed out. This bizarre and savage way of fighting threw the Tongluo cavalry at the front into disarray. Horses were like a second life for cavalry. Thus, cavalry rarely left their horse to attack their enemies, let alone feast on human flesh like these chitons. Even though Abusi's Tongluo cavalry had been tempered through battle, they had never encountered opponents like these before. Everyone who saw this was deeply shaken. Even more shocking was that these 7,000 savage chitons seemed to surpass the Tongluo cavalry in terms of pure strength. Few people had imagined that the chitons would have such powerful soldiers. At the very least, many of the Tang had never anticipated this. Humph! But a moment later, Abusi coldly snorted, and his halo rippled as a new energy traveled through it to the rest of his army. Bang! A shockwave blasted out as the 20,000 Tongluo cavalry exhibited their true strength. A bronze saber suddenly cut through the air and cleaved through the weapon of the opposing Sunchasur rider. The sharp Tongluo saber was like a bolt of lightning as it sliced across the Sunchasur rider's neck. As the gleam of the saber faded, a head spun through the air. It was only now that the blood gushed out from the Sunchasur rider's neck, rocketing more than 10 feet into the air. How could this be? The rider's eyes were wide open in disbelief as he looked at his beheaded body, wondering how he had been so easily killed. Thud thud thud. More and more heads flew through the air and dropped back to the ground. The sight of several dozen of their number being killed finally elicited some shock from the Sunchasur cavalry, and disorder began to appear in their ranks. Not even the Tongluo cavalry could compare to the Sunchasur cavalry in brute strength, but in terms of fighting technique, the Sunchasur cavalry were lacking. Damn it! Kill them all! The leader of the Sunchasur cavalry roared, his eyes instantly turning red. The chiton fighting style was extremely rough and broad, but they had been through many battles and overcome many foes. How could the king of the 8 divisions, the Sunchasur cavalry, be so easy to deal with? Their moves had been practiced thousands of times, and even if there were flaws, their opponents would have little opportunity to exploit them. But the Tongluo cavalry had somehow managed to seize these brief openings and kill many of them. This was truly a first for the Sunchasur cavalry. However, this fact also stirred the madness and fighting intent within the Sunchasur cavalry. As a tribe that lived in the cracks, the chitons were a fierce people that did not care for their lives, growing stronger the more adversity they faced. This was even more true for the Sunchasur cavalry that stood as the leader of the 8 divisions. A stronger opponent was more capable of stimulating their latent ferocity. Nay, their horses neighed as the Sunchasur cavalry exploded with violent stellar energy. Like madmen, they burned their potential energy and accelerated, casting aside all apprehensions as they charged at the Tongluo cavalry. A Sunchasur rider roared as he charged at a Tongluo horseman riding at maximum speed. Plush! As the two collided, the Sunchasur rider was stabbed through the stomach by the Tongluo horseman's saber. But the Sunchasur rider didn't care that he was stabbed, even pushing himself forward, using his flesh to hold the opponent's weapon while he stabbed his own saber into the Tongluo horseman's body. Plush! A saber emerged from the back of the Tongluo horseman. The Tongluo horseman was stricken with shock. No one had expected the Sunchasur cavalry to use this kind of mutually destructive method to deal with the Tongluo cavalry. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Both sides began to sustain losses. Sunchasur riders and Tongluo horsemen dropped from their mounts. Meanwhile, Sunchasur riders jumped from the backs of their horses like wolves onto the horses of the opposing Tongluo cavalry. For a moment, the battlefield was total chaos. The Sunchasur cavalry were already extremely strong. The moment they put aside any concern for their lives, not even the Tongluo cavalry could easily deal with them. Bastard! Tongluo great General Abusi cursed. If the Sunchasur cavalry persisted in this way of fighting, then even if he managed to annihilate them, the Tongluo cavalry would lose at least 5,000 men. The Tongluo did not exceed 10,000, and they were invincible above 10,000. The Tongluo were few in number, and the loss of 5,000 to 6,000 men would be a devastating blow. But the Tongluo had been able to make their name in the world through their bravery and ferocity. If they fell back just because of some savages, what dignity would they have left? Concentrate your stellar energy to protect your vitals. Activate the Tongluo blade. Abusi furiously roared. He swung his saber, unleashing a wave of saber energy that cut through tensome Sunchasur cavalry at the waist and sent a plume of snow rising 100 feet into the air. And a moment later, the Tongluo cavalry quickly began to adjust their formation. The Tongluo blade. This was the greatest tactical fighting formation of the Tongluo tribe. In Taizong's era, this unique formation had been used by the Tongluo in their capacity as the protectors of the sovereign to deal with formidable foes. After many generations, it was finally appearing on the battlefield once more.